Welcome to Duel School, the best place to step up your game quick. This episode of Duel School is going to focus on Yu-Gi-Oh!, but there will be more covering Magic and other general TCG tips, so be sure to check back for more. That said, this is a new segment for me, so be sure to hit the like button if this helped you, you liked it, or if you just want more great content. Now on to the video. At its very simplest, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a two-player card game where both of you start with 8,000 life points, and the player who loses all of their life points first, loses. Simple, right? Yeah, right. About as simple as a thesis on molecular biology. Okay. Maybe it's not that complicated, but this game has a pretty steep learning curve. Basically, there are three types of cards: monsters, spells, and traps.
It's a trap!
Thank you, Admiral. Monsters are your main tool to drop your opponent's life points. Monsters come in all sorts of fun shapes and sizes, and there are even different types: normal, effect, fusion, synchro, tuners, exceed, monsters with flip effects, and in just a few months we'll be getting yet another new monster type: link monsters. But those aren't a thing yet, so no point in making this harder. I'll do a post-link video when the time comes. Each player can normal summon one monster from their hand per turn. Keep track of when you and your opponent normal summon a monster. That has got to be one of the easiest ways for people to get cheated: extra normal summons.
I think I'd notice if my opponent put down an extra card if you can only put one down per turn.
Yeah, you'd think so. But when decks can special summon 15 or more different monsters in one turn from the hand, deck, extra deck, and graveyard, it gets real easy to lose track, so pay attention. Next up are the spell cards. These nifty cards are what you use to change the rules of the game for you and maybe your opponent. You play these down in the spell and trap zone, except if it's a field spell, then it goes up in the field spell zone. You can play as many of your spells per turn as you want, but only on your turn. Unless it's a quick play. And it was already set on the field when your opponent starts their turn. That applies to spell cards in the graveyard too, since some spell cards have additional effects in the graveyard. Lastly, we've got the traps.
It's a trap!
Yes, thank you. These are exactly what they sound like. Cards you set, and either you or your opponent can trigger them. Some of the more common traps are things like Trap Hole and Mirror Force families. That's right, if this is your re-entry to Yu-Gi-Oh!, you might be surprised to learn that Trap Hole isn't just Trap Hole. There's like 10 different ones, all for different situations. And the same goes for Mirror Force. Like spells, these go in the spell and trap zone, but unlike spells, as long as it's not the turn you set it, you can use it on either player's turn.
What happens if my card activates my opponent's trap? Can I use another card?
As long as it fits normal spell and trap conditions, is on the field, and follows spell speed, you can activate a card in response. The only exception is quick play spells are the only spells that can be used, and if it's your turn, they can be played from the hand. Spell speed goes like this. Monsters and normal spells are spell speed 1. Quick play spells, traps, and quick effect monsters are speed 2, and counter traps... No more. Counter traps are speed 3. Speed 1 can start chains, but they can't be any further on the chain. Spell speed 2 cards can be used as long as no spell speed 3 cards are on the chain, and spell speed 3, being only counter traps, cannot start chains. It's kinda hard to counter nothing. Monsters, spells, and traps are what you'll use to make your deck. You have to have at least 40 cards in your deck with no more than 3 copies of any one card. Be sure to check the banned and restricted list when you're building your deck, because while most cards are limited at 3 of, some cards can only be used as 1 or 2 ofs, and some cards can't be used at all. You have been warned. Not all of your monsters will go in your main deck, however. Some special monsters go in your extra deck. These are any fusion, synchro, and exceed monsters that you want to use, each of which has its own unique summoning method, and you're only limited by the cards that you have access to in your hand, field, and graveyard. Fusion, being the oldest, is the simplest but requires more cards. That is, unless it's a contact fusion, then you don't need any extra fusion cards. Synchro came next, and it's a little more complicated. For synchro monsters, you don't need any extra cards, but you do need a tuner and 1 or more non-tuner monsters that have combined levels equal to your synchro monster. When you go to synchro summon, check and double check the requirements, because while most are a tuner and 1 or more non-tuner monsters, Some need more than one tuner, and some have to use other synchros. I'm looking at you, Shooting Quasar Dragon. First there was Fusion, then we got Synchro. That was followed up by Exceed monsters. These bastards don't have a level, no. They have ranks instead. To Exceed summon one of these, you need to use a certain amount of monsters with the required level. But the monsters you use as material don't go to the graveyard. Instead, you put the Exceed monster over top the material in a monster zone, and the material can be used after its summoning for added effects. Even though when you Exceed summon the material stays in a monster zone, it isn't considered to be on the field, so a lot of abilities won't work like you want them to. That's pretty much it for the different types of cards in Yu-Gi-Oh!
What are those weird diamond things for?
Those are the Pendulum Zones. They're the newest summoning method introduced into the game so far. Pendulum summoning makes sure you always have monsters to protect you. First, you set the scales with Pendulum Monsters. These confusing looking cards are actually pretty simple. Depending on how they're being used, they're either monsters or spells. If you set the scales with them, they're spells, and you use the top effect. Also, this number here is really important when you're setting your scales. Once both sides are set, once per turn, you can pendulum summon as many monsters from your hand or face up in your extra deck that have a level in between the two scale numbers. So if you have the scales set at 1 and 9, you can summon as many monsters as possible whose levels are 2 through 8.
Face up in the extra deck?
That's right, because pendulum monsters never really go away. When they're destroyed, instead of the graveyard, they go face up in the extra deck, ready for you to pendulum summon on your next turn. Now that you know all about the cards, different summoning methods, and zones, let's look at the turn order. First things first, the draw phase. This is exactly what it sounds like. Next up, the standby phase. Here some effects will activate, but other than that, nothing happens. Then comes main phase 1. This is where you summon your monsters and play or set your spells and traps. Now that you have monsters and your field is set, it's time for the battle phase. If it's not the very first turn of the game, now is the time for your attack position monsters to attack. That's right, monsters can be in attack or defense position. If a monster is in attack position, it can attack, but if it's destroyed by a stronger monster in battle, you'll take damage equal to the difference between the two monsters' attack. Conversely, if it's in defense position, it cannot attack unless it's a super heavy samurai, and you won't take damage if it's destroyed, except if the attacking monster does piercing damage. Another difference between attack and defense position monsters is if a monster attacks a monster with the same attack, they're both destroyed. If a defense position monster with, say, 2000 defense gets attacked by a monster with 2000 attack, nothing happens. And if a monster with less attack than the defense position monster has defense, your attacking monster won't be destroyed, you'll just take damage. Speaking of damage, there is a small sub-phase in the battle phase called the damage step. This is when attacking monsters do damage. It's really not complicated, but a lot of people have trouble with this for some reason. If an effect triggers at the beginning of the damage step, it's before damage was dealt. If it says at the end of the damage step, it's after damage was done. Occasionally a monster will get special summoned during the battle phase. If that happens, and you're the one who summons it, and you're attacking, it can attack too. However, if you summoned it and you're defending, your opponent can choose to continue attacking the same monster or switch the attack to another target. Or they can choose to not attack at all. But if the special summon switches the attack to target it, then there's no choice. The attack just continues with the new target. Now that all the monsters have attacked, it's time to go to main phase 2. This is the exact same thing as main phase 1, and if you haven't normal summoned yet, this is your last chance until your next turn. And the last part of your turn is the end phase. Some effects triggered during the end phase, but other than that, nothing really happens. If you do have cards that activate during the end phase, you get to choose the order they resolve. Keep that in mind because it can really alter your plays. Once your turn is over and your opponent starts their turn, they go through the same steps, and you go back and forth like that until the game's over. You do also get access to a side deck that you can use to switch cards out of your deck, but this is more for tournaments and structured events, so that'll be looked at a little more in a later video. If this didn't confuse you too much, you might have what it takes to be a duelist. Hit the like button if you made it this far or if you want me to make more videos like this. Subscribe for more great Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh content. Follow me on Twitter at TCG Guide. And as always, have a great day, guys.